Unless you're in history class, it's hard to have a serious discussion about Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Because if you've been the butt of countless jokes across many decades, you become a less serious topic than you'd have been otherwise. And the few people who try to be serious about Hitler often have an agenda, like politicians and talking heads who make Hitler comparisons, but end up making fools of themselves. Jon Stewart got it just right.
You know, I don't think something can even be considered an issue or a debate in this country unless there's been a Hitler reference. These days, when it comes to demonizing your enemies, there's a certain someone whose name is on everybody's lips.
The Patriot Act is the first step. You know, Mein Kampf was written long before Hitler came to power.
Saddam Hussein is now taking his rightful place alongside Hitler.
Arafat is the modern Hitler.
Adolf Hitler had something called the Gestapo. George W. Bush wants to do the same thing.
A bunch of Hitlers. Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler. Seems like both sides have decided to dredge up Adolf Hitler.
And the Hitlers keep on coming.
Now, that clip is from 2005, which proves that public ridicule won't stop silly comparisons. I say all of this because I actually do want to ask two serious questions. The first question is easy, but the second, not so much. Here's the easy one. We know that Hitler and the Nazis are the ultimate bad guys. But why is that so obviously true? The simple answer is Hitler started World War II, which eventually killed 50 million people.
Before 6 a.m. on Friday, September the 1st, 1939, German forces crossed the border into Poland after a huge aerial and land bombardment. The force and speed of the invasion shook the world and gave the dictionaries a new and terrifying word, blitzkrieg.
Along the way, he and the Nazis also perpetrated the Holocaust. Ethnic mass murder on a scale and with an efficiency that is unique in history. That's the easy question and answer about why Nazis are the ultimate villains. The second question is not so easy. It doesn't ask why, but instead asks how. How did Hitler and the Nazis come to power?
Deutsches Volk, Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil! Sieg Heil!
How did that happen? Even as I ask this, there may be an answer you've heard or learned that comes quickly to mind, or maybe not. Either way, I ask you to hear me out because I'm going to answer the how did that happen question, and this answer will not be one you've heard before. Please join me for the next few minutes. I believe what you see and hear will be exceptionally satisfying and intriguing. So here goes. We need some context, which will come from the decade or so before the Nazis came to power. This chart of Germany's stock market and the socioeconomic analysis I'll include along the way is our lens. I'll use it to show the problems textbook histories don't even try to look at. The chart is also the key to the counterintuitive insights of socioeconomics. Long-term trouble in Germany began soon after the end of World War I in 1918. Hitler was a foot soldier in that conflict, which Germany lost. Yet the German stock market actually rallied from the start till the finish of the war, right at the end of 1918. That still positive mood helps explain a thorny fact that's absent from the history textbooks, namely, that despite the surrender and retreat of the German army, they returned to a hero's welcome back in Berlin.
In mid-December 1918, the first German troops arrived in Berlin. The people welcomed them as an army with no cause to feel ashamed.
The men wore green laurel wreaths over their steel helmets. The machine guns were garlanded with green branches. Many a soldier had a child or sweetheart on his flower-wreathed horse. A feeling of confidence, of fresh hope in the future, seems to have returned with the troops.
But after that positive mood peak came the precipitous crash. In the 3 years after, Germany's stock market plunged to nearly zero. And that's a problem for anybody who thinks war is bad and peace is good for the stock market, because in truth, neither wartime nor peacetime is a reliable predictor of financial market trends at all. Social mood is. And in Germany, social mood disintegrated during those 3 years. Germans went through a notorious hyperinflation. Yes, the baskets of cash to buy bread or a head of lettuce actually happened. So did hunger. 23% unemployment. Punitive war reparations. Nationwide strikes repeatedly turned violent in the cities. A number of regions in Germany were in open rebellion. Social order turned to disorder to the point of near anarchy. By any measure, the profound instability in the 1920s was more extreme than in the 1930s when the Nazis came to power. More on that in a moment, but I will note that the early 1920s is when Hitler spent 8 months in prison for treason after he and his Nazi cronies marched into a Munich beer hall to begin a revolt against the government. It ended badly for the Nazis. Here's the relevant point. The rest of the 1920s saw Germany regain much of its industrial might, and high and low culture in Berlin flourished. Their art and literature and cinema had an immense influence across Europe and in the U.S. The German Roaring Twenties were more freewheeling than in America. The Nazi Party was around then, but on the political fringe. As the decade went on, it saw a decline in popularity. Yet, the country still did not fully recover. By the time the Great Depression began, which in Germany was 1928, the long-term trend in mood had been negative for nearly a decade. Their stock market and economy began another tailspin. At first, not dramatically, the way it had before, but the negative trend did reassert itself. The trend line clearly suggests that times were tough, and they were. GDP went down, unemployment went up. Even so, the initial years of this crisis were not as extreme as the early 1920s. The political environment was tense, but not near anarchy. The German legislature functioned, and the country continued to have free elections. This brings us to the apparently critical year of 1932, which by then meant Germany had been in a long-term negative mood trend for more than 14 years. The events that unfolded in 1932 were like a descending stairway to catastrophe.
Als unsere Partei gerade 7 Mann hoch war, sprach sie schon 2 Grundsätze aus. Erstens, sie wollte eine wahrhaftige Weltanschauungspartei sein. Und zweitens, sie wollte daher kompromisslos die einzige Macht und alleinige Macht in Deutschland.
Lots of people knew it was a bad political outcome, but in truth it proved even worse than it seemed at the time. German President Paul von Hindenburg was 84 years old and in poor health, but in March 1932 he ran for re-election. He got 49% of the vote, the highest of a 4-candidate race. But German law said you couldn't win without a clean majority, so they had a second vote, and Hindenburg was re-elected with a 53% majority. Adolf Hitler came in second with 32%. That was the closest he ever came to winning a free, fair election. Germans did not vote him into office, which is not surprising. There was no obvious reason to expect they would vote Hitler in. The Germans were well educated and civilized. The social and political environment in 1932 and 33 does not offer a satisfying explanation for why Hitler came to power or why the Germans were fearful enough to follow along.
Und stets aufs Neue ergriffen, beglückt und begeistert sein. Denn die Idee und die Bewegung sind Lebensausdruck unseres Volkes und damit ein Symbol des Ewigen. Es lebe die nationalsozialistische Bewegung. Es lebe Deutschland!
Again, German society in 1932-33 was not as dire as it had been in the years just after World War I. So, it was not near-term events that really controlled the bad outcome. The politics were almost farcical, with a literally senile President von Hindenburg trying to form a coalition government and giving Hitler the chancellorship, which at the time was a mostly powerless position. No, it was the cumulative psychology of the long-term negative trend going all the way back to 1918, when the Germans lost a major war, suffered economic deprivation, and lived with political chaos. If you get sick with a scary illness again, you'll probably be afraid that the second time is going to be worse, even if it's not. The country's collective fear of the future had reached a collective extreme. Social mood, as reflected in the stock market, is the only root cause that explains how Hitler and the Nazis came to power. Nearly 15 years of long-term negative mood eclipsed the near-term trend and left the German public susceptible to authoritarianism. And when they consented to an authoritarian as pathologically ruthless as Hitler, then Germany goose-stepped into dictatorship in a stunningly short time. The big picture point is the one I just described. Collective fear of the future reached a collective extreme. Long-term social mood, as reflected in the stock market, is the only root cause that explains how Hitler came to power. Thank you for watching. I'm Robert Folsom.
Hi, this is Mark Allman, the director of the Socionomics Institute. If you found this video as intriguing as I did, you are welcome to follow the link to discover more about the science behind our presentation.